reply. So the way the MBSA works, the Northern Student Alliance, is a provincial lobbying organization that lobbies the provincial government. And the format of the board was changed last year to include 2 representatives from every school. This year, we saw that the executive director of the MBSA has left the organization. It was a board decision, so it's up to the board. And as an executive of the MBSA, it's kind of a complicated relationship where you have to work, where if you're on the board of the organization, you're working for the best interest of the organization. So yes, I'm there to represent Mount A students, but I'm also there to make sure that the students of New Brunswick we're working towards the best interest of the students of New Brunswick. So it was a board decision, something that was sort of out of Mount A control. But I think I'll leave it there and my
Yeah, so I guess part of the thing I really would like to do is reach out to other unions to join the MBSA. I know that UNBSA is not yet a member. It's actually from my hometown, so it's certainly something that I could definitely work on. The other thing is that I'm very good at communication. I'm fluently bilingual, which of course the MBSA is a bilingual organization, as well as the province of New Brunswick. And I think that would really help me in keeping together all the organizations from UNB Fredericton to Université de Moncton, and etc. So thank you.
So to speak to the strength of the MBSA and how to strengthen the MBSA, I think that's where my experience on the MBSA is going to play a huge role next year. Yes, we've lost the executive director, so having people there who have been through that transition already is going to play a huge role. I already have connections with the government that came in September, and that's also going to play a huge role in making sure that the interests of the students of New Brunswick are there. I've met with the Minister of Post-Secondary Education. I know the Premier. I've met him, etc. So I think that's going to play a huge role in next year.
So in addition to, I guess Mark mentioned his experience, I've also worked with members of the MBSA. The ones that came to help represent CASA last year during the campaign were integral members of the MBSA. In addition to the fact that I'm familiar with a lot of the different ministers in the government, Margaret Ann Blaney, who's my own local MLA, I know her relatively well. Say hi all the time. And then, of course, I went to school with the daughter of the finance minister. He's from my community, and I also worked with him last year, or not last year, but I worked with him at the refinery for a brief little while. So I have met members of the government, and I wouldn't say that. I think that would also help me in my role in trying to keep it together.
I'll respond by saying, yes, knowing ministers in the government is very important. That's all good. But being around the MBSA, this year, I'm familiar with the issues that we've lobbied on all year. The multi-year funding agreement is something that we're continuously talking to the government about. Student loans is always a huge issue in New Brunswick. Interest rates, once your loans are finished, reducing those interest rates is the real cost of government borrowing. The timely completion benefit is something we're constantly talking to the government about, and we're constantly lobbying them. And then the evaluation of the student financial program, which looks like it's going forward. But having that experience, knowing the issues as well as the people, is also going to play a huge role.
In addition to knowing the issues that have been brought up this year as having a vested interest in my province, I also know the issues and the history of those issues since for a very long time. So yes, I know the minister. I've met these ministers before. It will make it easier to open up a dialogue, and I know the history of these issues, which will make it easier to discuss them with these same ministers.
The MBSA is an organization that, honestly, if I were elected, I'd have to refer to my VP External on a lot of it. But a lot of the specific issues, such as student loans, are really can be related to any student. And this is an issue and an organization that, while dealing with, I would really work through my VP External, and with all issues, that it's really up to the president to really use the power around him to make the best decisions happen, and that's what would happen in this case.
I was involved in the MBSA 2 years ago. I've stayed somewhat peripherally involved in it this year. The MBSA is one of the stakeholders in the New Brunswick Youth Strategy, so there's always that relationship there with the old executive director. The secretary of the MBSA is involved with the youth strategy, and also the community colleges, the NBCCs and CCNBs in New Brunswick. are involved with the youth strategy. So actually getting those community colleges involved in the NDSA is one of the things that I'd like to see. CCNB DF left last year, and I'd like to bring those schools back in and start representing all students in New Brunswick, not just the university students. Also hiring an executive director. You need somebody running the office, you need somebody answering phones, responding to media inquiries. You need that day-to-day presence in the office, something they don't have right now, and it's holding them back from achieving all that they possibly could. Thank you.
I'll first say that my experience with the NBSA is very limited. I do have some knowledge of it, but I've never been involved with the organization. My opponent has been involved. Last year he was Vice President External. I wouldn't call this a weakness, but perhaps more of a structural disadvantage. Having said that, I've sought some background on the organization. The executive director position was eliminated this year. Ultimately, it was deemed unsustainable by the board. I think that perhaps a review of the position is necessary because it is necessary for the organization's functions. But we also need to make sure that as an organization that represents all New Brunswick students, that it's done sustainably and that organization can continue to fund itself. One of the major arguments was that the executive director was a huge line in the budget. So I think perhaps a review of that and a review of the salary is something to consider. Having said that, this is simply from the information that I saw external to me. I would certainly have to be briefed if elected, and it's something that I would definitely seek to improve my knowledge upon.
I believe involvement in organizations such as this and other organizations are really specific instances of expertise. And I think it would be more than brief if anyone were to be elected on these issues, but this is just something that an overall goal, an overall vision of the future, and once elected, the president should really seek information on these organizations further than just being brief and furthering their own involvement from that point on.
Again, this is an advantage I have, that I do have this extensive knowledge of the NDSA, how they work. It is another example of how my experience puts me up and above the competition for this position. From the time I put my platform out and I had hiring a new executive director, I've had lots of positive feedback from former directors on the board, former executive directors, former executive members of the NDSA. And I think that is something we need to do. It was hard to afford that. It was a huge line in the budget. An option for this is actually going to a part-time position, something that ANSA, which is basically the NDSA in Nova Scotia, their executive director works only part-time. That's an option for us, but I think there needs to be that employee there because everything that the NDSA has achieved, the growth that they've had in recent years, is really due to that transition to hiring that executive director and having that office presence, and not entirely relying on input from the board.
Again, I'll reiterate the fact that my experience does not lie in the external portfolio, and again, I don't think that that's a weakness of mine. I also have an extensive amount of experience in student governance within the Mount Allison community. That's where my experience lies. With regards to the NBSA, I think that the most important thing to consider is the fundamental principles of student representation. I think that anything else will fall into place, and I think that a big part of the position, of any position really, is transition, and that's something that I would need more help with transitioning into. But again, I think that the fundamental principles are the same when it comes to student governance and representation in general.